the work that we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks, I don't know how long this is going to take, but effectively what this is this is training. This is a training session because once we're done working on this project, we're going to start building, we're going to start having you all design and build musical instruments. And I know some of you are in woodworking, some of you have a bunch of skills and talents already. You could design like a hollow body guitar. You could make like instruments out of metal, and you could use all sorts of materials, and that's fantastic. I couldn't do that. I don't have the skill for that. What I could do, though, is I could build a simple, nice-looking platform with some shape to it out of wood. I could attach strings to it to make it like a guitar, or I could make pieces of wood that I could strike with a mallet, so it would be kind of like a xylophone. Like, I know I could make a musical instrument even with my limited woodworking ability. And one of the things that I want you all to be thinking about is when you use a musical instrument, there is an element of visual art to what you're doing. And those of you who are informal musicians, you may have a cheap guitar or a cheap piano. But even a cheap guitar like this one, which was given to me for free, and it's been banged up over the years to a pretty serious extent. Even this, like, if you look at the back of this guitar, like, it's really nice wood. There's a little inlay in between these two pieces. It's got lacquer on it. Like, it's nice straight grain. The fretboard itself, this is rosewood, like, and it's got, again, this has little, these are plastic inlays, but it still looks pretty nice. And the whole thing, it plays like this is a piece of junk, but this is also, in my opinion, a work of art. Now, I have nicer guitars, and some of you have nicer instruments than this. You might, if you play a stringed instrument like violin or cello or something, you might have something that's really valuable. You might have a really nice piano or electric keyboard or a drum set or whatever it is. They all have in common that people actually do try to make them look good. So one of the things that we're going to try to do is help you develop some skills so that this, like I said, would be out of reach for me. Maybe some of you could do this, but I couldn't. But we would like to have you building things that are within your reach, that look really good and make music. So part of what we're going to do with the Tangram is practice those skills. And I'm going to talk you through a few different things today. Ms. Reinwald is the expert on the woodworking part. So she's going to be the one to help you with how to do some of these things. I'm going to show you, I'm just going to throw out some ideas. And what I'm going to focus on is the mathematical design work. So I'm not the one to deal with the woodworking, but I can help you figure out what you will need to do with your pieces of wood to make a really nice Tangram. And what I hope is that those skills will then be skills that you can apply when you make your musical instrument. And those of you who have any interest in any kind of creative visual art, all of this stuff is stuff that you can potentially use well beyond what we do in this classroom. Okay, there were some questions. Did I get them all, or does anybody have anything they want to know? Okay, so here's what I want to start with. And on Monday, I had you all look at this diagram. I had it up on the screen, and I said, like, this is what you're going to do. And a whole bunch of you, for completely understandable reasons, went straight to, oh, I know, I'll print it out. Just print it out. And then I can, like, put it on something, and I can kind of figure out where to cut from there. Here's the problem with that. It's not unusual for you to start with material of a certain size. And the story that I have to share, it's not about artwork, but I put new siding on my house a few years ago. And when I did that, there are these places where you have to kind of like cut out notches to fit over windows or doors or you know, like the hose bibs for the hose and stuff like that. And all those things had to be in the right place. And I couldn't just get online and find a template and print it off and tape it onto the back of my siding and then cut along the template. In order to get my siding to go over the top of my windows, I had to measure. I had to know where the siding was going to start. I had to know where the window was. I had to know how high up to cut it. And I had to make all those measurements with rulers, write them all down, and then walk over to the piece of siding and like draw it backwards on the siding so that I could cut it out with a jigsaw and a circular saw. And I screwed up a bunch. I wasted a bunch of pieces of siding because I cut them backwards or I cut the wrong size. But the point being, it was the equivalent of taking this template right here and just putting it on top of a piece of wood and then starting to cut. Because what you'll see is these don't match. And if you were to say, okay, but I could just print out the template bigger, you're sort of right, because you could. But if you wanted to get this template to print out exactly the same size as this piece of wood, you would be printing for a long time. Because the first time you print it, it's going to be too small. The second time, it's going to be too big. And then it's going to be too small again and too big. And then basically the idea of printing something that is going to fit perfectly over a pre-cut piece of material is not super realistic. And the reason that that matters is because all of you are going to start with the material. If you start with a template, even if you take the template and you put it onto a piece of wood and you trace along the outside of it, and you cut it out and you get everything perfect, what you're going to find is almost certainly the template won't fit anymore. So if you start with the template and then cut your wood, the wood won't be the right size, because as you cut it and sand it and plane it and joint it, you're going to find that the dimensions change and the template won't fit anymore. If you make the wood first and then try to get a template the right size, you're going to have the same problem. No matter what you do, the template isn't going to fit perfectly. What that means is this is a measurement problem. It's not a printing issue. It's not something where you can print something and use that. You have to be able to make measurements, and your measurements need to be exact enough that you can start by making this piece of wood. This is your first step. I'm going to very briefly talk about how you might make this piece of wood, but this is Ms. Reinwald's territory, so I'm gonna let her help you with that down the road. Your job today isn't really going to involve this, but what I would do if I were making this, so I suggested to you that it needs to be pretty big. These need to be, I think, no smaller than like 8 inches by 8 inches. Some of you have the skill to build something this big, which is how big, like if you went to the store and bought one of these, it'd be this big. But I think most of you are going to find if you try to make it small, then the errors you make in cutting are going to make it unworkable. You're going to end up like making a little mistake and then having to shave a piece down, and your pieces aren't going to fit together well. If you make it bigger, you're going to have a little bit more room for error. It'll work better, because if you make a 1/16 of an inch cutting error on something this big, it'll still fit together. If you make a 1/16 of an inch error on something this big, it won't fit together anymore. So what I would do, and this is where Ms. Reinwald is going to come in, what I would do is I would find wood either in the scrap bin, or Ms. Reinwald can maybe help you find some other wood, or you might have some at home. I would find a few pieces. So you might find one piece, oops, that's not a pen. You might find one piece that is kind of looks like this, and I'm deliberately drawing it with kind of like not perfect edges, and it's not perfectly square, like it's going to be a chunk of wood and it might be broken on one end. And then you might find another piece, maybe even a different kind of wood and a different width, and then maybe you find one more piece that is sort of not the right size. And what you can do, and this is a woodworking trick, what you can do is you can get one edge of this square. So essentially what you'll be doing is you'll be taking one side of this and making it a right angle like this. You'll take one side of this and do the same thing, or actually you'd need to do two sides of this, and you would take one side, this, and make a right angle. That didn't come out too well. And then you're gonna glue these together. So you'll take this piece and glue, oops. You'll take this piece and you'll glue it onto this piece so that it's lined up perfectly. You'll take this piece, you'll glue it on to this piece so that it's lined up perfectly. And then you'll cut the edges to make a perfect square, and you plane it down. And all of this takes a lot of work, and those of you in woodworking have probably done something like this. How many of you have done something like this in woodworking? Did you make a cutting board? Yeah. Yeah. So this is the same basic technique that you used for the cutting board. You get right angles, you use the jointer, you glue things together, you clamp it down, then you cut it, or then you plane it, and then you cut it, and what you end up with is a chunk of wood that's really, really solid, but it's made up of several pieces. They might be of all the same species, they might be all different pieces, but when you're done, it looks really good. That's gonna be your starting point, and that's the piece that Ms. Reinwald will help you with. That takes you to here. And at that point, you know what your design is gonna be, and you have a piece of wood, and you don't, I don't know exactly how big it's gonna be. It might be 8 inches on a side, it might be 7 3/4 inches on a side, it might be 9.1261815 inches on a side, but however big it is, the proportions of this diagram are gonna be the same. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because what we can do here is we can think about where these shapes intersect each other, not in terms of actual measurements, but in terms of where this shape is in relation to this shape and 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 this shape. And it turns out that basically all we need to think about is dividing lines into half and then dividing those lines in half again. And there's a bunch of different ways to do it. Here's how I would do it. I would start with this line right here, which goes from corner to corner. So this line right here goes from corner to corner. And on your wooden square, once you have it, you're gonna draw a line with a ruler that goes from corner to corner. And what you're gonna see is, I'm not gonna be able to do this perfectly. I'm not gonna be able to do it perfectly, partially because my surface is, this vertical surface is not ideal for what we're doing right now. The proportions might not be quite right. This may not be a perfect square. I think it looks like a square to you, but I don't actually think it is in real life. And I have to line this up. This like Techno pen isn't gonna draw the line right where I put it. But what I would do on the piece of wood is something like this. And we'll see how well this turns out.
I think there's a line tool.
Yeah. No, I know. I could use the line tool, but you can't. So I want to show you what you would do to make this. And I know I can't make it perfect, but you can see that when I draw this, it's not going to let me turn it. When I draw this, I can draw it from corner to corner. Now, I'm not going to be able to line it up that way, unfortunately, for the reason that Oscar just pointed out. I can't. If I put my ruler here and then try to draw a line along this ruler, it's not going to draw it along the ruler perfectly. But you get the idea that that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to just show you how it would work, and then you're going to have to take what I do here with somewhat of a grain of salt. Okay. So I'm going to do a corner to corner line here. And that's pretty good. I mean, that's not the worst line I've ever drawn. And then we're going to draw, we want to figure out where the halfway point of this line is. So to do that, I actually have to measure it. And I'm going to measure it in centimeters because those are easier to work with in general. So this line is about 76 centimeters long. So 76 divided by 2 is 38. So my halfway point is gonna be about right here, okay? So halfway is about right here, and again, I can't make my pen do what you're gonna be able to make your pencils do, which is draw where you actually put the pencil in and draw the tip. And so that's this point right here, that's halfway. And then my next line I'm gonna draw is this one right here. So this goes from halfway to halfway along these two lines. So I'm gonna figure out how wide this line is. This one is about 57 centimeters. So 57 divided by 2, it's a little tricky. It's 28 would be 56. 29 would be 58, so it's gonna be halfway in between there. It's gonna be 28 and a half centimeters. That'll bring me to halfway. So here's 28 and a half centimeters, it's gonna be right there. This line, I don't know if this is the same length as the other one. It should be, but it's probably not. So yeah, and it's not. This is 54, so that's gonna be 27 centimeters.
The aspect ratio, otherwise it,
What's that?
if you don't lock the aspect ratio of a square, it becomes a rectangle.
It's, the issue isn't the aspect ratio of the square. The issue is the difference between the aspect ratio of that screen and the aspect ratio of this one. There's nothing I can do to make the measurements line up perfectly. This screen isn't right. So I'm gonna show you visually, because that's what's more important. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be easier to go to the corner to corner on the other one without going all the way? And
Well, where would
measuring
you
the
stop?
diamond?
Where would you stop? How do you know where
Exactly,
to
so
stop?
you are going to measure where, so that in the middle is where the diamond starts, and that's where that goes right there. So you'd stop right on the corner of that diamond.
So you're not wrong, but the way I would do it is like this, because I think this is gonna give me a just as accurate of an approach, and there's a couple advantages to what I'm doing right now. So now I'm gonna draw this line, and again, it's not gonna be perfect because I'm drawing on a like projector. So my pen tip isn't drawing lines where I really want it to. And now I'm gonna find halfway through this line too. So this line is about 38 centimeters. 38 divided by 2 is that 38?
Divided by 2 is 15, 19.
Yeah, so that's 19. So I can't see my ruler, so that looks like
So 19.
right there. And then when I draw a line from here, I'm gonna try to get it so that it goes through these two midpoints, and it looks like this one wasn't drawn in quite the right spot, but that's because my aspect ratio isn't right. This isn't a square. So that's this line right here. And I don't need a template. I'm just drawing from half to half to half to half. And now I need to find out halfway along this line and halfway along this line. So this one is, all these numbers on here are confusing me. Somebody else has written all over this. This is about 37, 30, 38, so that's gonna be about 19 as well. So here's 19, should be about right there. This one should be about 19, it should be about 37, but it's not. So this is 30, no, this is closer to 39, so halfway is gonna be about 19 and a half. So that's gonna be right there. And now I can draw this line from here to here. And I can draw this line from here to here. And you can see this one didn't end up being at the right angle. But if your square is a square and your pencil is drawing lines where you actually want it to, this technique will work. So I'm just splitting my square up into halves and half lines and quarter lines, and then connecting the dots. This is what I'm going to cut out. The beauty of this technique is no matter whether the template fits or not, no matter how big my square is, it'll all work. The keys to make this work are that you need to have a square that has 90-degree angles on the sides. That's where Miss Reinwald is going to come in. And you need to make sure that your square has side lengths that are the same. They have to be the exact same length. It has to be as close to a perfect square as you can get. Mine wasn't a perfect square, it was close. Okay? So, and then when you start, so this is how you can mark things out. If you start by getting a really nice piece of wood, and then you start marking it, and then you start cutting it, what you're almost certainly going to find is that you mess it up. And again, this is where Ms. Reinwald is going to come in because she's got the woodworking expertise. Well, I can tell you, I know I would mess it up. If you gave me a beautiful piece of wood and said, do this, I could draw that on there really well. And then I would start cutting, and I would blow it. I would make all sorts of mistakes because the woodworking tools that you all have been trained to use aren't perfect. Like those bandsaws, they tend to if you push them a little too quickly or things aren't lined up just right, they draw curves. So if you were to take this and just pop it into the bandsaw, probably what would happen is you'd cut this line and it would look more like this. And now you've just ruined the whole thing. So one of the things that we're going to do is sort of help you come up with jigs, is that what we would call them? Jigs, so that it holds we want to hold this thing at 45-degree angles and stuff, so we want to get it so that we can tilt it onto one of these corners.
And use the table saw to cut it?
Well, so you're not all going to be able to use the table saw because you're not all trained on the table saw, but what you want to be able to do is tilt this thing so that the sides are at 45-degree angles, and then put it in it's a jig, right? That's what you would call it. Something that will hold it in this position so you can push it straight through the bandsaw. And if you get it lined up perfectly, and you push it slowly, and we have a nice sharp blade, and you're really careful, then you can get a pretty reasonably straight cut just using the bandsaw. And then you can do that again here, and you can do it again here, and you can do it again here, and here, and here, and you'll have all your pieces. The pieces aren't going to be perfect, but if you make it big enough, then with the sander, you'll be able to get the edges right, be able to sand down any imperfections, so that ultimately what you'll have is something that is actually really nice. In order to do that, you're going to have to practice. So don't get the best wood you can and just start cutting. Part of the work that you're going to do after you've practiced this design work, part of the work that you are going to need to do is just practice making the cuts. Get some scrap wood, some scrap plywood, practice making nice straight cuts using the tools that you've been trained on. You can definitely ask woodworking students and or Ms. Reinwald to make cuts. I can use the chop saw and the table saw as well, but I'm not as skilled as some of your classmates, and definitely not as skilled
Probably
as
should use
Ms.
the
Reinwald.
chop saw for this.
Well, maybe. I mean, it depends on what you're doing. Like
Chop
if
saw
you're
is harder to learn than table saw.
well, but I could use it. I don't need I know how to use the chop saw. So if you have something like a piece of wood and you want to get the ends cut off, that's something that we could potentially do on the chop saw if that ends up being easy. Yeah.
Can we use our own design as well as yours?
It has to be this because the way this so I didn't show you this part yet, but the way this works is that you get these outlines of puzzles, and then you have to figure out how to make this shape with your Tangram shapes, but you don't see the individual pieces, you just see the big outline. And so that's half the point of doing this, is to be able to do these puzzles. And I don't know if I can find one here like this. This is what they look like. So you don't necessarily know how the pieces all go together to do this. Some of them are really obvious and easy, others are more challenging. All right, so What I would like you to do today is first in here on paper, practice with rulers and pencils and any other implements that you would like. Practice making this template the way that I showed you, where you're finding halfway points and you're drawing lines so that you can repeatably get a accurate template drawn on a sheet of paper. Once you've gotten that, the next step is going to be to practice making some cuts with wood. Before you get started, Ms. Reinwald, do you have anything that you want to add?